Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Can everyone hear me in the back? I think so. Okay. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. My name is Kim Brown. I'm the Transportation Options Coordinator for the city, and I'm the project manager for the Bicycle Master Plan. I would like to thank our elected official who is here with us this evening, Councilor Jack Weiss, and Councilor Fleetwood was here a little earlier. I would also like to acknowledge the Bicycle Master Plan Steering Committee members for their hard work and dedication to work on the plan throughout the whole process. And if steering committee members could stand up, that would be great. Yay. So stay standing. I want you to stay standing up. Melanie Swanson is there. She's with the Hub Community Bike Shop. Melissa Morin with the Whatcom County Health Department. Next to her is Gary Malick, Western Washington University. And there's Sean Lukey, who's with the Mount Baker Bicycle Club. Blanche Bybee is with Whatcom Community College. Dan Burwell is with the Bellingham Transportation Commission. And one of our members, let's give him a round of applause. One of our members isn't here tonight, and that is with Bob Pritchett with Logos Bible Software, and he did bring it. Oh, I'm sorry, Jessica. Jessica Wunschel is with the Whatcom County Homeless Coalition. I'm so sorry. She was standing, and you were behind me. Anyway, yes. Who has been our gracious host at the welcoming table. Was going to say, Logos Bible Software, one of our steering committee members is represented on that, and he did send a volunteer who's been out helping with the bicycle parking, so we're appreciative of that. Like to thank a few other people. Richard Bruno has been helping out. Well, there's Glenn over there too. Dave Tucker, and we have a couple members from the Washington Conservation Corps who do a fabulous job for the city. We have two who have been out there helping us all night, Corey and Becca. And thank the folks from Everybody Bike they're keeping everybody's bikes safe with a valet bike parking. So isn't that fun to have, to ride up and just check your bike? So I think this should be something we do more often in Bellingham, but that's been great. Who else? Oh, I think I need to introduce you to city staff who's working on the Bicycle Master Plan. And we have Rory Routhey, who's our city engineer and assistant director for Public Works Engineering. And where's Chris Como, transportation planner with Public Works Engineering. Chris Behe. Where's Chris? He's our GIS analyst with Planning and Community Development. Heather Higgins, Education and Communications Coordinator for Public Works Engineering. And I think I've got that. Yay! We really have a good group of people working on this plan. I also see a number of our Bellingham Transportation Commission members here. Why don't you stand up just so people can acknowledge the work that you're doing for all modes of transportation, and definitely for bicycle and pedestrian. Bellingham is a pretty darn good place to bike. We're known as being bicycle friendly. The League of American Bicyclists has designated us as a silver level bicycle friendly community. That's nothing to just sneeze at. That's great. But we would like to become gold or platinum, take it to a higher level. And what we want to figure out are what are the facilities and programs we need to provide safe and comfortable facilities for all members of our community. And that's why we're here tonight. That's why we're doing the bicycle planning process. And we'd like to hear from you. So many of you have already been around at a number of the stations. We'd like you to provide input. on the goals and objectives, on priority destinations. You've been making comments on the maps. What works for you in terms of bicycling in Bellingham? What do you like? What don't you like? What prevents you from getting on your bike or getting to a specific destination? And where would you like to be able to go? We also have, over on this side, boards that have different facility types, and we'd like to know what you think of those. What do we want to see here in Bellingham? We're going to be looking at all that. So we have comment cards. Hopefully you've been talking to staff and consultants and our steering committee members. We also have at Station 6, we have our interactive map and online survey, and you could do those here tonight, or you can visit our website, cob.org/bike. And if you don't remember that URL, we have little business cards over at Station 1 that have that on it. And the survey and interactive map will be open through May 12th. So please do those and encourage other people to do the same. And on that note, I'm going to turn things over to Pete Lagerway. He is the project manager for Tool Design Group, and they're the consultant that's helping us with this plan.
Thank you, Kim. Before we get going and before I introduce our team, I want to honor what is probably the most important group here. All of you who rode a bike here tonight, I want you to stand up. Let's go. Let's give these guys a hand. Fantastic. Okay, and if you walk too, that'd be great. And of course, we love the people who use transit too. Fantastic. Okay, introduce just a couple other people on our team. Jenna Kaufman, right here. And Jenna did a lot of the work for what you see here tonight, so thank you, Jenna. Bill Schultheis. Bill's an engineer with Tool Design Group, and he'll be helping out with a lot of the design issues on the plan, so welcome, Bill. And Adam Parast. Adam, where are you? There you are. The wonderful maps in the back. Adam, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, if we could get the lights. Okay, I'm going to briefly cover this evening, and then there'll be a question and answer period. There's quite a few people here, and I'm going to ask you to hold your questions to the end, if you could. But feel free to kind of think of a few things as we go forward. I want to talk a little bit about the plan development process, so you know what to expect over the next 9-10 months. I want to talk a little bit about some of the essential work items. In other words, what's going to be in this plan. Also for ways for you to be involved, and then just a little introduction to bicycle facilities, expanding on some of the maps that a lot of you looked at back here. I always think in threes, and I think it's maybe that's all I can remember, I don't know, but nonetheless, so I like to think of a plan development as having three distinct parts. One is data collection, and I define that very, very loosely. Data collection is the sort of scientific part of data. Those are things like bike counts and what are motor vehicle volumes, those things that you put a number on. But data collection is also this meeting tonight. It's the public involvement. It's your opinions, your thoughts. That's why we're having this meeting. So I would characterize this meeting as a listening meeting, part of the data collection, part of getting everything that we need to know to go ahead with the plan. So once the data collection is completed, and that will include some field work, we will draft a plan. And when you see the draft plan, by the way, you will see that it looks like a lot like what you're looking at this evening. So when you look at the goals and objectives, and you see all the little green dots behind it, you're going to see those things in the plan. When you look at destinations, and I noticed a number of destinations are just showing up right away as being very, very important, you're going to see those in the plan. And you're going to see us use those destinations as a way of prioritizing projects and programs. For those of you who voted for something that you're the only vote, don't be discouraged. We're not going to throw it away. It's just you'll all be included in that. So again, first part is data collection. Second part is doing a draft plan. We're going to come back to you with a draft plan right around Thanksgiving, just to give you a sense of the timing. We'll refine it and then complete it next January, February. So those are the 3 steps. So some of the essential work items, this should not be a surprise to you. The vision, goals, objectives, that's where you're voting on over here. By the way, I added just a couple things here just so you get a sense of how we approach the plan. We have the vision, and we have a vision up there that you can write to. We'll have a couple goals, and it'll be things like, depending on how it comes out, but things like increasing bicycling, number of cyclists, reducing the number of crashes, that kind of thing. But out of that, we're going to have not only a long series of objectives, but very detailed strategies and actions. So the objectives need to fulfill the goals, the strategies need to fulfill the objectives, and then the actions need to promote the strategies. So it's going to be very, very detailed, and the idea here is that we really want a plan that you can measure and you can figure out are we really implementing it? Are we being successful? So that's part of one of the major items. One of the things that we want to hear from you, again, is who's the target audience? And this is something you've probably seen before. It originally came out of Portland, but a lot of communities now, is that of the population that potentially could bicycle, about 60% of folks bike some, but not a lot. And one of the reasons we do the surveys we do, and we'd encourage all of you to do the survey, is to ask people, why they don't bike. What could we do to encourage you to do more bicycling? These are the interested but concerned. And the word concerned is there because what people typically tell us is that we're concerned about motor vehicle traffic, we're scared about being out there, and we want safer facilities. So part of what we have to think about here, if we're going to get more people bicycling, if we're going to move from that silver to the gold, and I really think that Bellingham can be platinum, is to look at what are the barriers, what's the target audience, what are the things that we need to do in this plan, and how do we prioritize them so that we really can get more people bicycling. So one of the first things that we'll be doing in terms of essential work items is putting together an on-street network. And so the maps that you see back there, they show existing facilities. So, for example, you have about 65 miles of existing bike lanes. There's another 60 miles of bike lanes potentially that have been identified in the transportation element. And we're using that as a foundation for developing a complete network. So we really appreciate it when you go to the maps, you draw on the maps, and we'll use that to move forward. One thing I alluded to earlier is in terms of a on-street network map is we'll be doing field work to test everything that we see. We find that once you get in the field, you see things that you normally wouldn't see. We're also going to do some analysis using GIS. There's a Viocity tool that Adam will be helping us with, and we're going to be using that to identify where the demand is. So we can put in a lot of data, things like density, where people work, a lot of the census data, and really come up with both sort of a, if you will, a mathematical side to this in terms of looking at need, but then also doing a good job of listening here this evening and putting the best of both worlds together as we go forward. Just some of this you already know, but some of it you may not. This is obviously the first of 2 public meetings. I mentioned that, with a second one coming in November. There's an interactive map that's been mentioned, and if you're interested in that, you can go to the computers over here, or we can talk to you about it too. And there's also a survey. You can go online and do both of those. And I think in the first week and a half, we had 400 people or so fill out the survey. So there's a lot of interest in this bike plan. It's really, really good. We'll be doing some focus groups and really trying to talk to some folks who may not come to a public meeting or who may not go online. For example, we'd like to meet with first responders as a group, or we may meet with some transit folks as a group, that kind of thing. You've already been introduced to the steering committee and the transportation committee. Everything we do is be going back to the steering committee to get it sort of vetted and tested. So when you look at some of the things here in the goals and objectives, when you look at the destinations, those lists were already developed with help from the steering committee. You get to comment on them, and then I'm going to take it back to the steering committee and go over it again. So you really see that what you're getting is really going to reflect the values and goals of Bellingham. So once we've put together a network, once we've compiled all the information we're getting from this evening, from the survey, from the interactive map, we're going to go out and we'll be looking at every single street segment that's on the maps back there. We're going to look at existing conditions. We're going to come up with a proposed cross-section. We're going to come up with a proposed facility. And so you're going to get a very, very detailed GIS-based map that will be a draft in terms of our recommended facilities. Doesn't stop there. We'll also take the next step, and then, again, working with Adam, we will prioritize all the recommendations sort of by corridor. And we want to make sure that if you're going to spend a lot of public money, you're spending it on those facilities, those corridors, those streets that are going to meet the goals and objectives of the plan and are going to get people where they need to go. The last thing we want to do is put a lot of money into the first project and find out we put it in the wrong place and it doesn't get used, and then it's really hard to argue for project 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we really want to focus on those projects that are going to get people out there bicycling, solve safety problems, address some of the barriers you've identified, and really move things forward very, very quickly. Well, I should also mention that we will be doing cost estimates. And typically what we'll do is we'll put together what we call a pocket calculator. And what it means is that it's a way that you can plug in, okay, 8 miles of bike lane, this many miles of paint, this many signs, click, you put in standard cost, and it'll give you a range of what things cost. So as all of you are interested in this, you want to get a sense of, what's this really cost, those kinds of things will also be available. It's a really, really good little tool. Toolbox. One of the things that we want to do is to give you the latest thinking on different design elements. And I don't know how many of you are sort of geeky enough to follow these national manuals, but I know some of you know what these are, so I'll just mention them. There's two national manuals out now that speak to bicycle facilities. One is the AASHTO guide, and that stands for the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. All you need to know is it's the one on the left, and that just came out in June. Bill Schultheis was very instrumental in writing this, and it really has some of the best practices and latest thinking. The good thing is that if it's in AASHTO, you have permission to do it. That means that it's been sort of officially adopted. The other one is the Urban Bikeway Design Guide. This is put out by NACTO, and that's the National Association of City Transportation Engineers. You won't find as much design detail here, but you're also going to find a lot of the more cutting edge kinds of things, and I'll show you some pictures of this in a minute. The things are being tried, and some of them you can just go ahead and do, and others you may need to get a special experimental status. But either way, these are some of the things that we draw our ideas from. There's other things out there too. So we're going to look to some of these manuals. We're going to look to our own experience, but we're also going to look to your feedback in terms of some of the things that we'd like to do. So, did I skip one? No. So just very, very quickly, some of the facilities that are out there. You know some of these, obviously a striped or paved shoulder. Whoops. These two got turned around. Sorry about that. But just staying on the theme of essential work items, these are some of the things that we would be looking at in a toolbox. So on the upper left, you can see a one-way cycle track, and I'll show more pictures of these in a minute. You can see a green bike lane, see a bike box, you can see a buffered bike lane, you can see where that buffer is in the lower right, in that it protects you from the opening car doors. I'll go through all of these in a little more detail in a minute, but other than to suggest that we want to give you very good design guidance, and it'll be a lot more than this. We'll actually give you the numbers and the dimensions and those kinds of things in some design guidance, things that you don't already have if you decide that you want to do them in Bellingham. By the way, people always say to me, are you for green bike lanes? Or are you for bike boxes? Or are you for cycle tracks? And of course, the answer I'm always going to give every one of those kind of questions, if it's a general question, is it depends. Every single facility is really good in the right situation. It's not good in the wrong situation. And you can put in a stop sign in the wrong place, and it could be not the thing you need to do. So it isn't whether you're for it or against it. It's really context and getting the right facility for the right situation. Another one of the essential work items is doing implementation strategies and performance measures. In other words, you need a way to measure whether you're being successful. The example I have up here is from Long Beach. A friend of mine, Charlie Gandy, had put this together, and this is at the end of the year. They did a kind of a self-assessment with their bicycle advisory board and came out with a kind of report card that looked at, did they accomplish the things they needed to do that year to implement their bicycle master plan. So what we want to do is be very, very specific in terms of strategies, performance measures, so that you can track year to year and know how successful you're being. By the way, we are also going to make this an electric plan, if you will, so that you can update it very, very easily without having to reprint the whole thing like we used to do in the old days. Same with the maps. We'll be giving the city of Bellingham will have electronic copies of it. So when you put those first facilities in, you can change the map real easily. You don't have an out-of-date map right away. So that way we can really have the latest and most up-to-date plans at all times. Some other essential work items: education, encouragement, enforcement. And what I just showed you here, this is a project I worked on in Florida where it says walk safe, but we would do the same thing for bicycling. Is that the good news is that we really have good information now as to what kinds of outreach in terms of education and encouragement work. We used to do general advertising like, be safe, watch for bikes, those sort of general kinds of things, and find that you don't really get a lot of change behavior with those. But if we really focus our message to a particular behavior, a particular demographic group, like if you're talking about children and bicycling, and you're telling them, look left, right, left, or something like that, we get changed outcomes and we get reduced crashes. So there's a lot of good research out there. It tells us what works, and we'll bring that latest thinking to you. A lot of that, by the way, research was done within the context of Safe Routes to School, because a lot more kids are biking to school, and so they've really done a lot of work in terms of education and encouragement and studies and enforcement in that area. So again, we will bring some of that best thinking to the plan. So a little bit on bicycle facility types, and you can see here the picture shows, and this is something you can do if you want. This picture shows a bike lane, but it's going by if you look up here, you can see a main street, and then you stop-controlled street where that car is. And one of the problems that you have when you have a stop-controlled street like that, you get to a street, and you don't know to expect a lot of cyclists. So in this situation, what they did is they took the bike lane, dashed it through the intersection, and put the shared lane markings there, and right away the motorist is going to be aware that there's bikes going by. By the way, when there's a motorist that hits a cyclist, what's the first thing they're always going to say to the police officer? Didn't see him, right? And probably that's true. And so this is also part of the good news, is that the more people that bicycle, the lower the crash rates are. And we've got really good numbers from around the country on that now, because if you think of as a driver, you cannot see everything that's going on. If you noticed everything, you would not be able to drive an automobile. So you have to have a natural screening process to see only those things that are important. Or if there's very seldom a bicyclist or a pedestrian, that doesn't become part of your visual screening. So the good news is that the more people bicycle, the more it becomes part of that visual screening, the more you're seen. And so one of the best forms of education in terms of just getting crash rates down is to have more people bicycling more often. So how many of you here are familiar with the word road diet? Raise your hands. Okay, a lot of you. Does anybody want to tell me in 1 second what it is? No brave people? Okay. Pardon? Okay, good. Okay, typically it's like taking a 4-lane road and making it a 3-lane road. In other words, 1 lane in each direction, a center turn lane, and then adding bike lanes. So one of the things that we want to think about as we go forward here in terms of how do we get facilities in is think of our urban roadways as a scarce urban resource, and it's space that we have to divvy up. A lot of competition for that space. So, and there's a lot of factors you want to look at in terms of how you divvy up that space. Lane diet is just like it sounds. It just means skinning up the lane so you have room for a bike lane. And then sometimes you can just add paint and markings, put in your bike lanes or whatever else you put in without doing anything because the space is available. So just to quickly go over some of the facilities and some of the widths and requirements. Seen the standard bike lane? So typically you're going to want a bike lane about 5 feet wide. Great if you can get 6. And of course, what happens if you get it too wide? Yeah, people park in it or use it as a driving lane. So gotta be a little careful. Climbing lane just means that you have a bike lane on one side of the street and not the other. Now, and typically you want to put the climbing lane on the uphill side because the cyclists are going slower, which means every car is going to pass the cyclist. If you're going downhill, you can keep up with traffic a little better. Why would you end up putting a bike lane only on one side and not the other? Space, yeah. Sometimes you don't have space for 2 bike lanes, and so you put it on the uphill side. And of course, then what do you put on the downhill side if you have an uphill bike lane? The shared lane marking. You guys already know all this. Okay, very, very good. And it used to be before we had the shared lane marking as a tool, we're very hesitant to put in a climbing lane because what would happen if you put a bike facility on one side of the street and not the other? Wrong way riding, yeah. And so we know that those crashes where the cyclist is at fault, the cyclist has done one of 3 things. One of them is wrong way riding. The other is going to be ignoring traffic control, like blowing red lights. And then, of course, the other one is riding at night with no lights. So those are the 3 biggies in terms of behavior change that we would want to do. And by the way, again, getting back to education, if you're going to focus on bicyclists, you want to focus on those 3 things because those are the 3 behaviors that cause the crashes, for example. Okay, buffered bike lane. Now, a buffer can be to the left of the cyclist, to the right of the cyclist, or both, depending on how much space you have. Typically, you're going to want the buffer on the left if you have high-speed traffic, and you really want to have that little bit of space. On the parking side, obviously you don't need a buffer if there's no parking, but if you do have parking, you really want to look at the turnover. So if you have a spot where there's, say, a coffee shop, and so there's, in the morning during rush hour, right when there's a lot of bikes, you have a lot of cars going in, out, you may want a buffer there because you're going to have a lot of car doors. On the other hand, if it's a residential neighborhood and there's almost no turnover, you might want to put the buffer on the other side, or sometimes you have room to do both. So again, you really have to have this contextually designed to get the right solutions. Probably not in the immediate future, but there's a lot of opportunities for doing bus bicycle lanes where you can share that lane. From a bicyclist perspective, if you think about the fact that on a really busy road, you can get up to 1,000 automobiles an hour in a lane. And if you're sharing with buses, you might have 10 an hour or less. So from a cyclist point of view, compared to normal traffic, it's somewhat of a non-event. So there's good designs out there, and just thinking in the future, if you want to mix the two, it can work very, very well. How many of you have seen back and angle parking? Got a few people here? Okay. This is taken directly out of the new AASHTO guide. And of course, if you have head-in angle parking and you have bicyclists behind you and you're backing out, can you see them? No, you can't see them at all. So really the only way we want to do bicycle lanes if you have angle parking is if you do back in. And of course, there's a win here for everyone because when you back in, if you hit another motor vehicle, it's not moving and nobody's in it. No personal injury. If you back out into moving traffic, of course, and you hit a moving car, both cars are moving, both have people in them, and you're much more likely to have an injury accident. And of course, if you have kids and you open the door and back in angle parking, and you open the door, what's the only way they can run? backwards to the sidewalk. And if you have to put something in the trunk, you don't have to stand in the street. You have to be a little careful. The back end of the car overhangs a little bit more, so you could scrape up some street furniture, hit a tree, so you just have to make sure that works. And then, of course, if you have an outdoor restaurant there, you want to be a little concerned about the fumes if it's right there. So, again, it's contextual, but there's a lot of good advantages. I know, you're not doing it yet, so I'm throwing out a new idea here. This is something that's been around for a while. Is once in a while, you're going to have a one-way street where you want a counterflow bike lane. And you can see it here. This happens to be right near my house in Fremont, the double yellow line. And on one side, you're going to have the bike lane, the other side, shared lane markings. And you can see here it works. Usually you don't want to put in a lot of these, but if you have a place where there's a lot of wrong-way riding, you might want to consider it. One of the principles of traffic engineering that we like to bring to everything we do is that good engineering invites right use. It should invite you to do the right thing automatically. Just tie this to enforcement a little bit, because this just reminded me of this slide. And I'm going to make this number up, but I use it with a lot of police officers I do training with, and they say, yep, that's about right. So just know this is made up. But if 85% of the people do the right thing, a little bit of law enforcement and education can take care of the other 15%. But if 85% of the people are doing the wrong thing, no amount of education and enforcement is going to fix it. So there's a real important, strong role for education enforcement, but it doesn't fix macro problems. So if you have a street, for example, that the speed limit's 30, and 85% of the people are going 45 miles an hour, there's no amount of enforcement that you're going to be able to afford to do that's going to really bring that speed limit down to where it needs to be. So just changing the signs or just doing enforcement doesn't work. What does work, though, is changing the visual messaging about the street. So one of the things that we'll be looking at in the plan and talking about a lot is what's the visual messaging of a street. Every street has two speed limits, right? The one's posted and the one that people go. And the one that people go doesn't necessarily have to be faster than what's posted. I live on a residential street that's 25 miles an hour speed limit. If you go more than 20, our neighbors will be going like that to you. It doesn't feel right. It's not designed for faster, and most people do go about 15 to 18 miles an hour. So one of the things that we want to think about, and bicycling and walking are part of that, is changing the visual messaging on streets. It's part of the design so that people automatically go the right speed. So there's a whole bunch of psychology involved in this as well. A few other kinds of facilities. This is a one-way cycle track. There's a lot of different designs for cycle track. This one just happens to be, you can see on the right side, they've used concrete to indicate where the pedestrians are, and then the asphalt where the bikes would go. By the way, without seeing a sign, if I had asked you ahead of time, I should have, to figure out where the bikes should go and where the pedestrians should go, would it tell you that automatically? Yeah, you just knew. Again, this is what I mean by visual messaging. If you have to put in too many signs, too much traffic calming, too many directions, too many yes, no, then it probably wasn't designed right in the first place. The beauty of this particular design is it tells you automatically what you should be doing without really having to overly sign it, too much paint on the ground. That's good design. And of course, you can see in this particular case is that there's also an area between the cycle track and the street, and so you get a little bit of elevation difference. Some of you may recognize this. This is just taken in Vancouver, north of here. This is a two-way cycle track on one of their downtown streets, and I won't go through it all now, but there's pretty complicated signal sequencing here to get people through, but it can be done, and you can see what they've done here. If you haven't tried it yet, I would encourage you to go up there and do it. Shared lane markings. I think you've just put in your first shared lane markings here in Bellingham. They are now in the national guidance, so you have permission to use them. Where you put them in the roadway depends. In general, you can see it can go to the right side of the lane, depending on width and other things, or it can go in the middle of the lane if it's a really narrow lane and you want cyclists to take the whole lane. Not going to get into the details now, other than to say that that guidance is there. By the way, just stepping back to, I talked about providing design guidance. One of the things that we'll be doing is providing a lot more detailed design guidance that's not in the national guidelines. So the national guidelines will talk about shared lane markings, some general placement where you put them, but it's not going to give you the really nitty-gritty details of how far from that marked crosswalk, how far from the bus stop, how do you place it so it doesn't wear out right away so that the wheels don't go over it. Do you put it at stop-controlled streets? Do you do it, on and on and on? So we'll give you a lot of detail for all the different designs so that you're really going to get some added value. We'll talk a little bit about bicycle boulevards. One of the things that we've been hearing over and over is that we really want more, we'll just use a popular term right now, low-stress bicycle facilities. I talked to you about that 60% of the population that's interested but concerned, and they're looking for lower stress kind of bike facilities. Generally, lower stress gets defined as lower speeds, lower volumes, lower widths, a lot of residential streets, places where people feel very, very comfortable. Some of the words that are being used, and we can call them bike boulevards, we can call them greenways, we can call them low-stress streets. It doesn't really matter what we call them, but the key is that people really want more and more of these. Now, if you were to use some residential streets, low-stress, we'll just call it a bike boulevard, what do you think is the biggest challenge of putting in a bike boulevard? Assuming the street's pretty good for biking already anyways. Crossing arterials, you heard this before. It is, because about every, especially with a nice grid system, every 5 blocks, every 10 blocks, you're going to hit a really busy arterial, and it's going to be really hard to get across. So that's where the cost is, and that's where the challenge is of doing bicycle boulevards, is really getting across some of the major streets. That said, we have a lot of good tools for doing that. I'm not going to go through them tonight, but if you have any questions later about that, we can talk about it. Now, in terms of bicycle boulevards, you can, in 2 examples here, you can either manage the speed or you can divert the traffic. So managing speed means that you just that. You try to get people to go slower. We have a lot of tools to do that. Or we can actually ask people to turn. So if you look at the image on the left, you can see here that the street is set up so the bicyclists and the pedestrians can get through, but the cars must turn. Now you have to be real careful with, we call that diversion. It's like toothpaste, because if you squeeze it here, what happens? It moves over to the next street. So, if you're on the wrong street, you may not be happy, or maybe you now can't get to your house. So we use that one with a lot of care. But certainly the speed management is something that we like to do. So, getting back to the question of arterial streets, you can see it right here. Go to the grocery store, and then just to the left of that, you can see an example here where the bicycle boulevard hits a major street, and then you have to figure out a way to get across that arterial. In terms of bicycle boulevards, you can indicate them in a number of ways. You can put up signs. You can put in shared lane markings. So you can use those sharrows, or we call them shared lane markings now. You can use those as a way, kind of a wayfinding, so you can follow them in. And a lot of times bicycle boulevards have a few twists and turns because you're going through neighborhoods, and so this can be a good way to do it. By the way, there's not much traffic typically on neighborhood streets, so the paint will last a long time. And you can also place them in places where the car wheels typically don't go, and they'll last you a long time in those kinds of streets. Speed management and a speed hump here. When you're looking at putting in things into the physical environment, you can try to, in general, just put them into two different categories. Things that make you go up and down, and things that make you go side to side. Things that make you go up, down, generally not as preferred, like you see in the image here. The first responders don't like it. The ambulance people don't like it. I'd put them in. There's places they work really well, but in general, that's sort of plan B. So here's just an example of other speed management. This is a pinch point. So the cars take turns in the middle of the road. The cyclists go on either side. There's a lot of variations on this. I'm just giving you sort of some general ideas. This tends to be more preferred. And all of you have seen the mini circles. And again, this tends to be a fairly preferred treatment. They have really high crash reduction factor. That means if you put one in, 9 out of 10 accidents are eliminated, all types. And so as you get more, they really manage the speed. This image here isn't quite right. It shows a stop sign on a residential street in the state of Washington, 2 residential streets. Typically, you don't even need a stop or yield sign. They're not put in typically. You'll notice, too, if you look at the little mini roundabout, the big apron, that means that the bigger trucks, the odd moving van or something that needs to get through, gets through. So that's how it accommodates the bigger vehicles. And again, here's another example of a diversion. The motor vehicles turn. Bikes are let through. Here's another example of diversion where you have to turn right or left. And again, I'm not going to get into all the design details. There's ways of combining this with signals, with rapid flash, with beacons, with things we call hawks, and all sorts of things out there. If this were a design course, we could go into it more. But just to say that there's a lot of different tools out there that you can use. One of the most important facilities that we're going to look at are the bridges. And think of bridges not over just bodies of water or railroad tracks, but wherever you have a freeway, you need to get over or under it. So I noticed that when people were voting over here in terms of priorities, a lot of votes for dealing with barriers. A lot of the barriers are going to be associated with places like freeways where there's only a few spots where everybody has to get through, and we haven't done a very good job of accommodating that. Those become very important. If we can't get across the bridges and through the barriers, quite often nothing else works very well, and so we're going to give that a lot of focus. The other thing that we're going to look at is, what are the critical bridges in terms of needing major repair? I was working in the state of Pennsylvania last year, and we had a meeting, and it came out at the meeting that there's so many critical bridges, and critical bridge means that it's going to fall down in the next 3 years and be closed if you don't fix it, that over half the state budget was going to critical bridges for transportation. So I said to the bike and the PED folks who were there, follow the money. If they're all going to get rebuilt, this is a great time to be involved. It was an advocacy group I was working with. I said, this is a great opportunity to be involved in redoing the bridges because they don't get built very often. I happen to live by the Aurora Bridge in Seattle. It opened in 1932. It was designed starting in 1928. It does a very, very poor job of accommodating motorists, bicyclists, and pedestrians. Since 1932 when it opened, we've had an average of 1 fatality a year since it opened because of bad design. So when you get a bridge wrong, you're going to live with it, and you're going to live with sort of the death it causes for generation after generation. So the bridges are really important. That's why we want to hear from you on those maps. That's why we're going to focus on them. A lot of little things. As cyclists, a lot of the little things matter, like figuring out where do I put my bicycle to trip the signal, those kinds of things. We have markings available. The new signal detection can be set up now. The newer ones, they detect bicycles. Unless you're in one of those fiber frames with no metal in it, I can't help you there, but for most of us, they're going to work pretty well. It's a bicycle traffic signal. You can get special permission to use them. They're not in the national standard manuals yet. The only reason they're not in is because it's a technological one at this point. And Bill, I know you're working on this, but I know people, at least that I've talked to in this region, have complained that the current bike, if you're a ways away, it just looks like a green ball, and you can't tell it's just bicycle, and there's some confusion. I think the technology is getting better. I think we're going to see it in the new national guidance sometime in the future, but that's what the signal people have been telling me. Green bike lane. We now have permission to do green bike lanes, and there's new federal guidance out on this, and you can use green. You can use green in a lot of different ways. One of the ways that I like to use it, in fact, this was one of the very first green bike lanes that I was involved in putting in, is where you have what I'm going to call the mixing zone or the transition zone. So where you have a bike lane, in this case, you can see the dashed bike lane. That means that it's a place where motor vehicles are crossing over the bike lane. In this case, the bike lane going straight and a pickup right turn only lane to the right here. So the cars have to move to the right to pick up that lane, turn right. So the green lets you know this is a mixing zone. So that's one way to use a green bike lane. We'll have more conversations about how and when and where you might want to use this. Here's a bike box. And I thought this was pretty clever. This is in Seattle. They put the first bike box in right by the police station, one of the precinct stations. They figured that way they'd get a good view if it's going to work or not and get some good feedback. And again, are bike boxes a good thing? And of course, the answer is it depends. There's a good place and there's a bad place for them. Quite often they're put in to prevent the right hook. They're put in for storage. They're put in to allow people to make that left turn. In some places they work really, really well. Side path. This is another facility. We're not going to be dealing with paths per se in this plan, but there's going to be short pieces here and there where we may need a side path, and that just means a standard path next to a roadway to kind of pick it up. Now, again, looking at the design in terms it tells you, does it tell you immediately where the pedestrian should be? Yeah, where the bike should be. And you look at that driveway, and it immediately tells you that the path has the right of way because it doesn't dip down and make it look like a roadway. So again, the design needs to convey who has the right of way. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up here real quick so I have time for questions. We're going to look a lot at intersections. Again, not looking at the paths themselves as part of this plan, but we're going to be the paths cross streets. And when they cross streets, we want to make sure that those crossings work. We're also going to look at intersections. And you can see the old intersection line here and the new one. The one message here is tighten them up and manage the speed. Big improvements for pedestrians, big improvements for bicyclists, big improvements for the motorists. Now the pedestrians don't need as much crossing distance and time. The signals actually work better. So one of those things we'll be looking at. Other creative ideas, you can see on the left there, a little left turn pocket for bikes only, one I did a few years ago. The one on the right is a new innovation that's being seen. The buses stay in the street, and the bikes get to do the bypass. So this is a way of getting rid of the hopscotch. You've all been on a hill where you and the bus pass each other 8 times. This can solve that. We're not going to do a signing plan, but we'll be giving you the sign protocol for all the different signs, recommendations on font size to color and everything else. Some creative signs. You can see my arm there holding a sign. This was put in front of a coffee shop. There's a lot of those kinds of things out there that we're looking at. There's some creative wayfinding. Sometimes people are concerned about sign pollution, don't want all those signs like for their bike boulevard. So here's another bike dot that you could use to put it in the street, and if you know what you're looking for, it can get you around really well. So with that, if we could get the lights, and we're going to take some questions, and I apologize, it went about 10 minutes longer. If you can stay an extra 10 minutes, we'll deal with the questions. Just a couple of sort of ground rules on the questions. If we could please limit it to a question, not a statement. That's what the forms are for. And also there's a fair number of people here, so I'm going to try to limit it to one question per person because I want to give a number of people, and I'll repeat the question, so go ahead. Okay, questions about expense and which ones are sort of signs and paint. I have a image that says paint is your friend, and then how much of them require other work. And of course, unfortunately, I'm going to be a little evasive and say it depends, because the paint is fairly cheap if you want to put in bike lanes, but if you have to grind off all the other paint and move the lanes around, and then at the same time reprogram all your signals, there could be a fair amount of expense. Other times you get lucky and all you have to do is put the paint down. So it really varies. But I think it's fair to say that anytime you're dealing with signs and paint, it's going to be on the cheaper end. When you start getting into signalization or moving a curb, which we won't suggest a lot, then obviously you're going to get into more expense. So, but each project's going to be slightly different. Okay, the question is, how do we spread retail out into smaller outlets? I'm thinking you're probably thinking about mixed-use development and not into the big boxes. So you don't have to go as far, yeah. Okay. Great idea. We're not going to do a land use as part of this plan, but yeah, it's a great idea. Yeah. Anything else? Question is, how do you rate the scenic versus the fast versus transportation? I'm going to sidestep a little bit of that and say I'm not real concerned about that. We built a wider freeway from Seattle to the top of the mountains, I-90, and clearly there's not a lot of jobs up there. There's some real nice ski resorts, and so we're quite happy to use transportation dollars we aren't really concerned why people are in their car. If they're going there, it's a legitimate trip. So I'm going to argue for parity between how we look at bike facilities and motor vehicle facilities, and I'm going to suggest that they're all important. A bike trip is a bike trip, and I don't really care. I mean, I care, but to some extent, it's not really why you're on your bike. They're all legitimate trips. The other challenge with this is almost all trips are multiple purpose trips. So starting May 1, our company has a contest with all the other companies similar size in the United States to see who does the most miles. And we won last year. And so I will start increasing my bike trip. Part of it will be to work, but part of it will be fitness, and part of it will be to win the contest. So I don't know where that goes. Yeah. Good question. The question is, how do we deal with bicycle and pedestrian conflicts? Well, a lot of the conflicts, of course, occur in trail systems, which we're not dealing with, but certainly people do jog and run in the bike lanes and some of those kinds of things. I think part of that is being aware of that and realizing, again, that good engineering invites right use. So I ask, why are the pedestrians in the street? Quite often it might be either a lack of a sidewalk, or the condition of the sidewalk's poor, or it's not wide enough, or there's obstructions in it. So part of it is having the other facility available, and then part of it is going to be obviously education on that too, and encouraging people not to do it. Okay, I'm going to get right back to you, but I've been all on this side, so I just want to make sure that. Okay. Yeah, one of the questions. Sure. Yeah, one of the questions is, how do we deal with outside the city? What we're not going to do is do a lot of design of facilities outside the city. But what we are going to do is make sure that any line on the map that goes out the city, the folks who are in the county knows about it. So this is an example of one of the focus groups that we'd probably do, is we would meet with the county, any other transit, anybody else that needs to be part of the conversation, to make sure that what we do, number one, they know about it and it works with their plans. So that's how we'll handle that. So good question. Yeah, there's a lot of standardization in terms of bike parking, and those are available. We'll be bringing those to the plan. Again, you can think of bike parking sort of two different kinds. It's the bike parking that's in front of the store, short-term parking. You're going into whatever, buy toothpaste, and you're out really quick. The standardization there is usually a hoop and no moving parts. And when you use it, if you have instructions, then it's too complicated. And if you automatically use it in a way that blocks the pedestrians, then probably it's the wrong design. So there's some basics there. And then the other is more long-term parking. And one of the nice things about parking garages, of course, is that there's a lot of dead space where we can always find spots for bike racks. And there, of course, we want things in terms of security, lighting, visibility, personal security, security for your bike. And then for transit, there's some really good bike parking now available. A lot of times people are going to little huts that have plexiglass so that you can have see-through. So you have a code, you get in, you lock your bike, you use your personal lock, but it's still also locked from the door. But you don't have all sorts of nefarious things going on because it's a see-through, unlike a individual bike locker, which you could rent and never put a bike in it. And so there's some really good things happening out there. Does that answer it? Okay. Anything else? Yeah. Okay, how is this plan fitting with the waterfront development? Kim, do you want to talk about that? I don't want to get is there a quick comment on that?
The waterfront, we're going to be looking at bicycle network throughout the whole city, which will include the waterfront, but it won't be a separate waterfront plan, okay?
Yeah, it's mostly correct. I said they're going to do two things. One is that where the trails cross streets, we want to be concerned about those crossings. And then the second thing, and I forgot to say this, is that there's a lot of trails where it's hard to get from one trail to another, and there's never going to be a trail, but you might need like a bicycle boulevard or a connection. So part of what we're going to do with the maps is look at connectivity between existing trails. So good question. This half has gotten like 3/4 the questions here, you guys. Okay, the question comes up wherever you have bike lanes, same with shoulders, you're in the puncture lane, as you put it. You know, I think that comes to, obviously you're going to have to do more sweeping, and then being smart about where you're sweeping, maybe what time of the year you do it. When I worked with the city of Seattle, one of the things that we would do is all the busiest bike facilities, we would make sure that they got swept one more time a year than everything else. And then also, too, as a cyclist, you know that one of the worst times to bicycle is like right after a snowstorm and there's been sand put down, or in the spring time, too. There's certain times of the year, or in the fall, all of a sudden all the leaves come down and all the twigs and you can't get anywhere. So part of it is maybe looking at the current frequency of sweeping. And you don't have to do it anymore, but you maybe can be a little smarter about when you do it, and that can make a big difference too. So, good question. Okay, it's 7:30. We said we were going to end up at 7:30. I'll probably take one or two more questions, and then we'll break up, and we'll be here for another hour to talk. Okay, seeing no more hands, thank you. Give yourself a hand and fill in the top.